Have you ever felt that chill when walking through an isolated place? Imagine now being in the middle of a dark forest, surrounded by mysteries and a scary legend that can turn your life into a nightmare. That's exactly what happened to a group of friends in Adventure Search. They just wanted fun and freedom, but they found something much darker. If you're a fan of stories that chill the soul, get ready to find out what really happened that night. Watch until the end, and you may never see darkness the same way again. Let's start this mysterious story, but first quickly check if you are already subscribed to the channel. That way, you can be sure that you won't miss any of the most chilling stories that we have prepared especially for you. Continuing. The idea seemed perfect. After months of intense work and a tiring routine, there is nothing better than a weekend away from the city. It was Raphael who suggested, let's go camping in the forest, breathe fresh air, escape the internet, and live a real adventure. Everyone agreed without thinking twice. The chosen forest was a few hours from the city, an isolated place surrounded by mountains and trees so tall that they seemed to touch the sky. It was known for its natural beauty, but also for the ancient stories that local residents told about it, stories that no one took very seriously. The group arrived at the location in the early afternoon. There were 5 friends: Raphael, always the leader of ideas; Anna, curious and fascinated by legends; Julio, the skeptic of the group who never believed in anything; Larissa, the shy one who loved nature but hated surprises; and Felipe, the funny guy who always broke the mood with his jokes. The path to the campsite was peaceful. The sound of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the gentle wind gave a false sense of peace. They laughed as they set up their tents, took photos, and explored the surroundings. "This place is incredible," said Anna, while pointing to a stream that ran nearby. As the sun began to set, the shadows of the trees grew longer, and the forest, which had previously seemed welcoming, began to take on a mysterious air. The silence became more evident, and the sounds that were previously pleasant became uncomfortable. A broken branch, a rustle in the leaves. "It must just be an animal," Julio said whenever someone seemed restless. Around the campfire, as the sky darkened completely, conversation flowed. Felipe was telling funny stories about past trips, but Anna, always a lover of legends, interrupted. "You know about the legend of this forest, don't you?" Everyone looked at her, curious, except Julio, who rolled his eyes. "Here you come with your stories." But Anna continued. "Residents say that for many years a spirit has inhabited these trees. They say it persecutes those who do not respect the forest or try to take something that does not belong to them. No one knows for sure what happens to the people that disappear here, but many believe that the spirit takes them." Silence took over the group for a moment. The fire crackled and the wind whistled through the trees. Raphael broke the mood with a forced laugh. "What nonsense! Let's have fun and forget about these stories." But deep down, everyone felt a chill, as if something or someone was paying attention to every word. The atmosphere, which had previously been relaxed, now seemed charged by something invisible, and the night was just beginning. Around the campfire, the flames illuminated the group's faces, creating dancing shadows that seemed to bring the surrounding trees to life. Each of them had a unique sparkle in their eyes, but also a past that marked them in different ways. Raphael was the leader of the group, always full of energy and crazy ideas. He was responsible for convincing everyone that camping in that forest was a great idea. "You'll thank me later. Trust me," he always said with a confident smile. Raphael had a way of inspiring security, even when he didn't even know if it was true. Inna, sitting closer to the fire, was fascinated by scary stories. "Since I was little, I loved reading horror books and investigating urban legends." Her curiosity made her seem fearless, but the truth was that she loved the chill down her spine that these stories sent. For her, Being in that forest was like living one of her literary adventures. Julio, on the contrary, did not believe in anything other than what he could see and touch. He was skeptical to the last hair. Always with a somewhat mocking expression, he loved to challenge Anna and her supernatural nonsense. "Spirits, all you need to do is say that the lake monster is here too," he mocked as he bit into a piece of marshmallow. Larissa was more reserved. She liked the idea of being in nature, but wasn't a fan of risks. "Since I was little, I avoided any situation that seemed to get out of control." But at the same time, she had a special connection to the tranquility of the trees and the wind. At that moment, however, Larissa couldn't ignore the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, there was Felipe, the comic relief of the group. Always ready to tell a joke or imitate animal sounds to scare his friends, he was the one who kept the atmosphere light, even in the most tense situations. "If that spirit appears, I'll invite him to play cards. Who knows, maybe he's just bored," he said, eliciting some nervous laughs. As the hours passed, each person's personalities began to stand out more. Raphael tried to keep everyone united and optimistic. Anna observed the darkness around her as if hoping to see something beyond the trees. Julio was joking, but he was starting to feel chills that he wouldn't admit. Larissa hugged her coat to her body, while Felipe tried to distract everyone with his jokes. The fire died down, as did the conversations. One by one, they retired to their tents, but the atmosphere was far from peaceful. Each of them carried their fears and thoughts, even if they didn't want to admit it. At that moment, no one knew it, but every characteristic that defined these friends would be tested to the extreme before dawn. The silence of the night was almost absolute, broken only by the sound of the wind and the occasional song of a nocturnal animal. Despite her tiredness, Anna was restless inside her tent. The brightness of the stars seemed to peek through the gaps in the fabric, and she couldn't get the story she had heard about that forest out of her head. When he could no longer contain his curiosity, he called Raphael and Felipe, who still seemed awake. "Have you really never heard the history of this place?" she asked, in an almost conspiratorial tone. Raphael sighed, but left the tent sitting next to her, while Felipe, always playful, brought a bag of marshmallows as if he were going to watch a movie. "Okay, Anna, just tell the legend," said Julio, leaving his tent with an expression of feigned boredom, but visibly curious. Larissa hesitated, but ended up joining the group, sitting very close to the fire, as if the heat could ward off the discomfort. Anna took a deep breath, enjoying the attentive silence of her friends. "They say that many years ago this forest was inhabited by an isolated community. They believed in protective spirits of nature and performed rituals to maintain balance between themselves and the forest. But there was a group that defied these rules, disregarding signs and exploiting what should not be touched." She paused dramatically, taking in her friend's expressions in the firelight. "The consequences were terrible. A spirit known as the Guardian has been awakened. He began to roam the forest, punishing anyone who dared disturb his peace. Legend has it that if you hear footsteps when no one is around, or feel a presence while you are alone, it means he is watching. And if he does speak out, well, no one who saw him lived to tell about it." The group was silent for a moment. Raphael gave a forced laugh, trying to break the mood. "Well, then just don't mess around, right? Let's sleep and stop this paranoia." "But there's one more thing," Anna continued, ignoring Raphael's attempt to divert the subject. "They say that the Guardian leaves signs before appearing, misplaced objects, voices in the distance, and if someone finds something that seems out of place, they must return it immediately, or what?" Larissa asked, her voice low. Anna looked at her seriously. "Or he will come get it." The group fell silent once again. Felipe laughed, but even he looked a little uncomfortable. "It's just a silly story, guys. Let's go to sleep before the Guardian comes to steal our snacks." They laughed, but the sound was nervous, almost forced. As they walked back to the tents, no one wanted to admit that deep down they were feeling something different, something that seemed to be moving among the trees in the darkness. The night advanced slowly, and tiredness seemed to finally overcome the restlessness of the group. Inside the tents, everyone was trying to fall asleep, but the silence of the forest was almost disturbing. There was no common sound of crickets or nocturnal animals, just a heavy silence as if nature was holding its breath. Felipe was the first to notice something strange. He woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was outside the tent. Initially, he thought it was Rafael or Ana trying to scare him, but when he heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps around him, his heart started to beat faster. "Rafael, dwarf, and you," he whispered, trying not to alarm the others. But the only answer was the sound of dry leaves being crunched under the feet of something or someone. Outside, Rafael was also awake. He hadn't heard the footsteps, but he felt the wind suddenly cool, as if an invisible shadow had covered the camp. He opened the tent slowly, trying not to make any noise, and peered into the darkness. Nothing, just the still trees and the dim light of the moon. Suddenly, Larissa screamed. The sound made everyone jump out of their tents, stumbling and almost falling towards the center of the camp. Larissa was pale, pointing to something near the unlit fire. "I saw someone standing there, looking at me." The others shone the area with their flashlights, but there was no one, just the ground covered in leaves and branches. Julio tried to calm her, saying it must have been a shadow or her imagination, but even he seemed tense. It was Ana who noticed the first anomaly. The strange amulet that Felipe had found earlier was now in a different place, right in the middle of the camp. He swore he had left it near his backpack. "I didn't touch it," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Give it back," muttered Ana, staring at Felipe. "What? Put this back where you found it," Ana insisted. "Now!" Felipe laughed, trying to appear carefree, but Ana's look was serious and frightening. Okay," he said, reluctantly picking up the object and walking away in the direction where he had found it. Meanwhile, Larissa continued to look around, as if hoping to see the figure again. And then the sound came, a low, muffled laugh like a child's, but distorted, coming from somewhere among the trees. "Did you hear that?" asked Julio, trying to locate the source of the sound. Everyone heard, but no one wanted to admit what seemed obvious. Something was there with them, something that was not part of the natural world. Felipe ran back, pale and out of breath. "I gave it back, okay? But there's something out there. I swear I saw movement near the trees." The group was silent. Rafael tried to maintain control. "Let's all stay together. Whatever it is, we cannot be separated." But as the night progressed, the feeling of being watched only increased. What once seemed like an exciting adventure now became an escalating nightmare. So have you ever heard of scary tales of camping in the woods? Leave a comment with what you know about this, and if you believe these stories. Continuing. The tension in the camp was palpable. Everyone was gathered around the newly rekindled fire, but the heat of the flames could not dispel the cold that seemed to be coming from within the forest. They whispered among themselves, avoiding speaking loudly, as if they were afraid of attracting something hidden in the darkness. It was then that Larissa heard it for the first time, a low, almost indistinguishable voice calling your name. "Larissa!" She froze, looking around. The others didn't seem to have noticed. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What?" Rafael replied, looking at her with concern. "My name! Someone called my name!" Felipe laughed nervously. "You're kidding, right?" "Now is not the time for jokes, Larissa. I'm not kidding," she replied, her eyes wide and full of fear. Before they could respond, the voice came again, this time louder, but still distorted. "Larissa, Everyone heard. The sound seemed to come from within the forest, but there was no movement among the trees. It was as if the voice came out of nowhere, echoing in their minds. This isn't normal, Anna said, holding tightly to the flashlight that was shaking in her hand. Julio, trying to maintain his composure, suggested it could be the wind. Sometimes he makes strange sounds, but no one believed in excuses anymore. The sound of the voice was clearly human, but with the wrong tone, something that shouldn't exist. Suddenly, the voice changed. It was no longer just Larissa who was being called out. Raphael, Anna. A dead silence fell over the group. Each name was pronounced slowly, drawled, as if the forest itself was speaking to them. "Okay, that's enough. This is some idiot trying to scare us," Raphael said, trying to sound confident, but the fear in his voice was evident. "I'm going to find out who's doing this." "Don't be stupid," Anna warned, grabbing his arm. "Whatever it is, it's not human." Before they could argue, the voice came again, this time closer. Come to me." The sound made everyone jump to their feet, turning their flashlights towards the forest. The trees remained motionless, but the call seemed closer and closer, as if something was approaching. "We need to get out of here," Larissa said, almost crying. "And go where?" asked Julio. "We are surrounded by kilometers of forest. If we leave now, we might get lost." But staying seemed equally dangerous. The group was divided between running and staying by the fire. However, everyone knew one thing. That night was far from over. And the voice, it wasn't alone. Fear hung in the air, thicker than ever. The feeling that something was watching them seemed to grow with each second. As the group tried to get closer to the fire to stay warm and protected, a sudden shadow appeared between the trees. A movement, almost imperceptible, but enough for everyone to stop and stare in the direction. "Did you see that?" whispered Felipe, his heart racing. I saw it too," replied Anna, her voice almost inaudible. It was a figure, a dark silhouette, that seemed to float among the trees. It was there, but it wasn't completely there. Its form seemed distorted, as if it were partially invisible, and yet everyone could sense its presence. Raphael took immediate action, trying to remain firm. "It's just the wind. We must be tired. Let's go to sleep. Everything will pass." But no one moved. They were fixed at that point. The figure, which had previously seemed distant, was now slowly approaching. There was no sound, just the feeling that the air was becoming heavier with each step the thing took. The figure materialized more clearly, and now everyone could see it. A human-looking being, but with completely black eyes, no pupils, no life. Her skin was pale, and her movements, although slow, were mesmerizing. There was no sound in his footsteps, but the weight of his presence was like an unbearable pressure on their chests. "That's not possible. That's not possible," Larissa whispered, feeling her legs shaking. The figure stopped a few meters from where they were. His mouth opened, but instead of uttering words, a strange guttural sound, like a muffled scream, came from his throat. It wasn't a normal sound, nor a human one. It was as if the air was being torn apart. He's here," Anna murmured, her voice cracking with panic. Julio, who had tried to be the most skeptical of everyone, now didn't know what to think. He stepped back, but something was stopping him from moving, as if the ground itself was holding his feet in place. The figure extended a skeletal hand towards the group. The air around him seemed to freeze even more. The fire in the bonfire flickered, as if it were about to succumb to the presence of that entity, but surprisingly, it did not go out. That was when the figure slowly pointed to the amulet that Felipe had found earlier. No, Felipe stammered, his voice shaking. He felt a wave of shivers run down his spine, as if he was about to be consumed by that presence. The figure continued to watch them with its black eyes, and then, with a sudden movement, it disappeared into the shadows of the forest, as if it had never been there. The group stood motionless for a long moment, not knowing what to do. The sound of the forest had disappeared, and even the wind had ceased. Everything seemed frozen in time. She left, Larissa whispered, not believing what she had just seen. No, she's still here, Anna replied, staring into space with wide eyes. She never goes away. Never again. The group knew at that moment that the nightmare was just beginning. The air was freezing. Even with the fire burning, an unusual feeling of cold took over the group. Panic was visible on everyone's faces, and what was once a night of fun had turned into a real hunt, a hunt where they were the targets. "We need to leave now," Raphael said, taking the lead with his eyes fixed on the darkness surrounding the camp. But his voice was shaking, and his posture clearly showed how much he didn't believe what he had just witnessed. The creature with black eyes still lingered in their minds. "We can't go out in the dark," said Anna, breathing heavily. "If we go, we will get lost. The forest will swallow us." Felipe, looking at the trees as if they were hiding places for something even more terrible, agreed. I've heard stories of people disappearing here. They say that the forest changes, that the trees move to draw you inside." The sound of branches breaking in the distance interrupted the conversation. It wasn't the wind, it was the sound of footsteps, heavy, slow footsteps, as if something very large was approaching. The tension increased. Larissa approached, trying to remain calm, but her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "That thing, the Guardian, he told us to come to him. That's what he wants. He attracted us." No one spoke for a few seconds, everyone aware of the gravity of what they were facing. They knew they couldn't just run away, because any attempt to run would be an invitation for the creature to hunt them, a death sentence in those dark lands. "Let's go to the highest point. If we can see something, we will have a chance to get out," suggested Julio, who, despite his fear, tried to maintain his sanity. "The worst that can happen is that we stay there and not be able to see anything. But if we stay here, we know what will happen." Reluctantly, but with no other option, the group began walking towards a small mound of dirt in the middle of the forest. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last. The sound of invisible footsteps followed them closely. Something was watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. When they reached the top of the small hill, they could see the vastness of the forest in front of them. Nothing but dark trees and shadows, where nothing seemed safe. But in the distance, they saw something that made them stop immediately, a faint glow, as if someone was carrying a flashlight in the darkness. Who is there?" Raphael asked, his voice hoarse. Nobody responded. The glow moved strangely, swaying as if it was being carried by something lifeless. The group hid behind the trees, watching in fear, and suddenly the glow stopped, becoming still, as if it had been waiting for them. "We can't go there," Anna whispered, trying to maintain control. "If it's the Guardian, he's calling us into a trap. If we go, we won't get out of there alive." But Larissa, staring into the distant light, didn't seem to hear. "He is calling us. We need to go to him. He wants to talk to us." The group turned to her, startled. The glow in the forest seemed to attract everyone, especially Larissa, as if there was something about her that linked them directly to that sinister force. "Larissa, no!" cried Felipe, holding her arm. "This is not normal." But before he could stop it, Larissa was already walking, her steps unsure but determined. The glow, which now seemed stronger, called her irresistibly. The others hesitated, but knew they needed to go after her. If they left her alone, they wouldn't survive the night. The creature, whatever it was, would not let them escape. With hearts racing, they followed Larissa to the glow, not knowing that this would be the worst mistake of their lives. The forest, silent and shadowy, watched every movement. As they approached, they heard a soft, almost imperceptible voice coming from where the glow emanated. Come to me," And so, like puppets on an invisible line, they were all drawn to the center of the forest, where fate awaited them. The Guardian was closer than they could have ever imagined, and the real hunt was about to begin. The group approached the light with their hearts racing. Each step was more difficult than the last, but the feeling of something pulling them prevented them from stopping. Larissa was at the front, almost in a trance, completely mesmerized by the light. The surrounding forest felt stuffy, as if the air had been drained. When they finally arrived at the location of the light, what they saw made them stop instantly. In the middle of the clearing, a tall, hooded figure shrouded in dark mist stood, waiting for them. His eyes shone, and an icy whisper came from his mouth. "Finally, you've arrived." The Guardian's voice echoed across the clearing, deep and menacing. The air became even heavier. Larissa, in a trance-like state, took a step forward. "Larissa, no!" Raphael shouted, but she didn't hear him. The Guardian smiled almost cruelly. "She already belongs to me. You all belong to me." The group prepared to run, but the Guardian raised his hand. The wind howled fiercely and the trees began to move, as if closing in around them. "There is no escape. The forest already has them," he said, with a low, drawling laugh. It was at that moment that the true reality set in. They were trapped. The night wasn't over yet, and the Guardian was just beginning to play with their souls. The air became even thicker as the Guardian spoke. The feeling of imprisonment grew. Every step the group tried to take back was in vain, as if the forest was holding them firmly in place. The trees seemed to come to life, their trunks twisting and closing around them. There was no way out. Larissa, still under the Guardian's control, slowly walked towards the hooded figure. His eyes were empty, as if he was in a deep trance, oblivious to everything around him. "She's not one of us anymore," Anna said, her eyes full of pain and helplessness. Felipe tried to call Larissa, but she didn't respond. The Guardian's voice echoed again, strong and imposing. "She has already become part of the forest, as all of you will become. There is no turning back." The group was desperate. The trees were now so close that the space between them seemed to disappear. Every movement was an effort. The clearing looked like a nightmare. Time stood still. The feeling of claustrophobia intensified, and the fear was now palpable. The Guardian was behind it all, controlling the forest, time, and even their minds. "We can't fight him," Raphael said, his voice breaking. "The forest, it knows us. It's been watching us all the time." The Guardian, with a quick movement, extended his hand towards Larissa, as if he was giving her the last instruction. She turned to her friends, now with an empty smile on her face, as if something had broken inside her. "At my command," said the Guardian, "you will be part of the forest, as it always wanted." The night was far from over, and the forest, with all its secrets and horrors, still awaited them. The group's heart was pounding, but they had no strength to react. With every word the Guardian said, a feeling of defeat invaded them, as if they were being consumed by the forest itself. The ground seemed to move beneath their feet, and the shadows around them danced, creating distorted images of indescribable creatures. Larissa, still under the Guardian's control, moved further and further away, heading towards the center of the clearing where a huge tree, twisted and black, stood like a silent monster. The Guardian followed her, his eyes shining with dark pleasure, as if he were about to complete an ancient ritual. "She will become one with the forest," Anna whispered, feeling the tears run down her face. "But we, what will become of us?" The answer came as brutally as the silence that followed. The Guardian raised his hands, and the surrounding trees began to shake. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet opened up with a crash, as if the earth itself was splitting apart to swallow them. "You cannot escape," he said in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. "The forest already has them." The group tried to retreat, but in vain. The ground was closing in around them, and the tree roots began to grow rapidly, wrapping around their legs, as if trying to trap them in their claws. Fear took over everyone. but a single question echoed in their minds. Was there a chance of survival? Felipe, with a trembling voice, shouted, "Larissa, come back to us. It's not you." But Larissa, with a blank look, simply continued walking towards the tree. The Guardian looked at her approvingly, as if pleased with the progression of the ritual. "She is no longer your friend, Felipe," said the Guardian, his voice echoing like thunder. "She is now part of the forest, and you will too." It was the final moment. The forest was about to swallow everything. What was left of the group could only hope that they would somehow find a way to escape, but they knew that time was quickly running out. True darkness was about to descend upon them, and there was no turning back. Larissa arrived at the central tree, her body now stiff and lifeless. The Guardian raised her hands, and a dark aura enveloped her. The earth shook, and the sound of the roots expanding was deafening. The forest was alive, thirsty for souls. The group, trapped by the growing vegetation, watched in terror. "We can't let her become part of this," Anna whispered. Felipe tried to free himself, but the pressure from the roots kept him firm. "We have to stop the ritual." The Guardian smiled, his words cutting through the air. "It's already too late." The atmosphere became heavy, and the forest siege tightened even more. Everyone's fate was about to be sealed. Desperate, the friends began to fight against the roots that held them back. Every movement was painful, as if the forest was feeding off his energy. The Guardian watched calmly, his imposing presence like a shadow that completely enveloped them. "If we can't stop this now, it will be the end for all of us," Raphael said, his eyes full of panic. Suddenly, an idea appeared in Anna's mind. "The tree! We have to destroy the tree!" With all the strength they had left, they began to fight against the siege of the roots. The Guardian seemed to just watch, almost amused by their futile efforts. The tree seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, responding to his presence. Felipe shouted, "Quick! We don't have much time!" They got as close as they could to the tree, but the roots moved with terrifying speed, threatening to swallow them. Larissa was now completely immersed in the dark fog that was forming around the tree. "Come on!" Raphael ordered. But would it be too late to save Larissa? The Guardian, with a malevolent smile, approached, his words like a final sentence. "Nothing can stop them now." With time running out, the tension became unbearable. Larissa was now completely enveloped in darkness, her features distorted, as if the forest had taken her essence. The tree pulsed with force, and the Guardian moved forward to seal the group's fate. Anna, with her eyes fixed on Larissa's figure, had a desperate idea. "If we can't destroy the tree, maybe we can rip Larissa out." She ran towards her friend, ignoring the roots that tried to trap her. But before she could reach her, the Guardian raised his hand, and a shrill scream echoed across the clearing, momentarily paralyzing her. "She is no longer your friend," said the Guardian, his voice cold and cruel. "You can't save her." But Anna, with unexpected courage, ignored his words. She grabbed Larissa's arm, trying to pull her back, but something pushed her away. The Guardian smiled and made a sudden movement. The ground shook once more, and an invisible force separated them. It was then that Felipe, with an expression of pain and anger, shouted, "If we can't escape, then let it be the last thing he takes." With all his strength, he used a piece of wood from the fallen tree to try and hit the Guardian. But before he could get close, the Guardian smiled, and with a quick gesture, the wood shattered into the air. That's what you are. Weak," he said, approaching Anna and Felipe. The group was now facing one last and inevitable confrontation. If the forest had anything to offer, it would be an ultimate sacrifice, and it was about to happen. With the fight lost, fear finally turned to acceptance. The Guardian was now just a few steps away from them, his gaze fixed, as if he already knew their fate. The air around them felt thick, with each breath becoming more labored, as if they were being absorbed into the forest itself. Larissa, now completely consumed by darkness, was no longer the same. His eyes were dull, and his expression was empty, like a soulless shell. The transformation was complete. The forest had won. The Guardian approached them, each step echoing like an omen. "You could have escaped," he said in a mild tone, almost as if he was regretting the situation. "But they chose to fight the inevitable." As he spoke, the earth beneath his feet began to move again. The roots rose, almost as if the forest was preparing to swallow everything at once. Anna, Felipe, and Raphael looked at each other, speechless. The terror had become something tangible, a weight in their hearts. The clearing was completely transformed. What once seemed commonplace was now a point of ancient rituals, where death and life were intertwined in ways they could not understand. And there, in that dark space, the Guardian gave his last command. "You will become part of this too. The forest belongs to all of us now." With no chance of escape, the group felt an irresistible force pulling them towards land. The roots slowly wrapped around them, dragging them into the abyss. They tried to resist, but the power of the forest was greater. Every move they made was useless. As the Guardian watched, his smile grew wider, knowing that this was the end, but also the beginning of something new. The forest, with its eternal curse, would absorb them, as it did with all who dared defy it. And so, the group disappeared, becoming part of the forest, their souls trapped forever in the shadows that lived there. Well, we are already uncovering more and more of this story. But before I continue, I realize that you still haven't liked this video. This is very important for YouTube to help spread our content. So, leave your like on this video, which is free, okay? Let's move on. With the group's disappearance, the clearing was filled with a heavy silence. The trees, once bustling and full of life, now seemed darker, as if they were celebrating the Guardian's victory. The forest, which had always been a place of mystery and legend, had now claimed more victims, and its thirst for souls seemed insatiable. The Guardian, observing his work, slowly turned and walked back to the center of the clearing, where the great black tree still pulsed. He was at peace, as if he knew there was no one left to challenge him. The ritual was complete. The forest was now even stronger, more powerful, and its presence extended to every corner of the night. But, as always happens with places of horror, the forest's story didn't end there. Those who ventured to camp on the outskirts of the forest years later would hear whispers in the trees and feel a heavy gaze upon them. Some would report seeing strange figures in the distance, shadows that moved among the trees as if watching anyone who dared approach. And among these whispers, the names of Larissa, Felipe, Raphael, and Anna were still whispered through the leaves. Their souls, now part of the forest, continued to wander, echoing the cries of despair and the final moments of their struggle. They became living legends, their stories passed down to new arrivals like a warning, or perhaps a curse. The forest would never stop being a dark and unforgiving place. The Guardian, eternal as nature itself, awaited the next group of unsuspecting people who dared to challenge his rule. And so, the horror story continued. And so, the echoes of screams and whispers continue to haunt the forest, while the fates of Larissa, Felipe, Raphael, and Anna remain sealed in the shadows. Their story is not an end, but a grim warning to all who dare step into the unknown. The forest, with its eternal guardian, will always await its next victim. And who knows what else is lurking in the depths of the night. But make no mistake, this is just one of the many mysteries that the world still holds. If you enjoyed this chilling story and want to know what else could be lurking, subscribe now and hit the bell, because the next legend could be even more terrifying. Don't miss your chance to explore the darker side of the unknown. We're just getting started. Do you have the courage to discover what comes next?